And I believe we are live on the internet. I don't know if anyone is watching. Might have to. Ah, it looks like there are no viewers. Excellent. All right, so I'm testing it right now, and I'll use the platform to be able to answer some of my questions, and I can just use this as my own personal little creative space. So hopefully the volume is coming through okay. If anyone pops in, then we'll have the opportunity for them to be able to evaluate whether or not the audio levels are good or not. Okay, so let me see. It looks like we have at least one viewer who's popped in. So if I'll play around with the settings a little bit, one viewer popped out, that's fine. So I'm going to use the opportunity here to talk about swords, of course. I had promised previously that I was going to be discussing, I was going to take the opportunity to answer questions from viewers that had accrued on my video that was discussing, that was just talking about different types of possible sword types. So I asked everyone, hey, what type of questions would you like to have answered? And I assembled a couple of them. So I have a handful of sword-related questions that I'll go ahead and answer. So the first question comes from Mr. Zen Hydra. And Mr. Zen Hydra asks, I assume Mr. It could be Mr. or Mrs. Zen Hydra. Zen Hydra asks, what are your personal favorite when it comes to reproductions of curved one-handed swords you either own or have first-hand experience with? I'm always angling for recommendations of good functional reproductions, especially when they fill an underrepresented niche in my collection. That's a good question. So, I enjoy several of them. Let me see if I can. I don't have any good way of evaluating whether or not my. Oh, okay, I do have. At least I know that I'm connected. So, of course, there are plenty of single-handed curved swords. So straight double-edged swords or single-edged swords. That's pretty much the two biggest divisions of different sword types. Single-handed swords are probably what I've collected more of than double-handed swords, and I bias very slightly towards single-edged than double-edged. So I have a decent amount of exposure to single-edged and curved swords. So if we want to call them sabers or the like. Oh, good. Scholar General popped in, and hopefully you can hear me, Mr. Scholar General. The As a result of that, I'd say that again I have a pretty decent exposure to single-edged curved swords. So this is Wandered. Let's read the question again. So my apologies to anyone who has to go back and rewatch this recording. Zen Hydra asks, what are your personal favorites when it comes to reproductions of curved one-handed swords you either own or have first-hand experience with? I'm always angling for recommendations of good functional reproductions, especially when they fill an underrepresented niche in my collection. So I do have a lot of experience with single-handed curved swords. And whenever someone tries to ask me what my favorite sword is, that's a very difficult ask. I always say it's like trying to choose your favorite child. I like almost every sword without a lot of discrimination. There are some swords that are very difficult to use and might be for very specific situations, but as long as I pick up a weapon and I can learn something from it, I consider it time or money well spent. So unless someone has done a particularly poor job at creating it, I usually am very slow to poo-poo it. That said, there are course, a couple of standouts that leave me smiling whenever I pick them up. So you've seen this one before. I have this Kilij, Ottoman Kilij from Peserey Handicraft, which is really nice. And there aren't very many production Ottoman swords that are out there, and certainly not many that are affordable. So the good makers like um, Osman Baskrut, Kilij Osman Baskrut, he makes spectacular swords, but the waiting list is long, and you have to have reasonably deep pockets if you want a commission from him. This example from Peserey Handicraft is a very faithful reproduction. It's not incredibly high end, so the detailing on it is not as amazingly high as you can get from very fancy examples of Ottoman swords, but is a perfectly functional and very faithful example of what it can do. It cuts well, it handles beautifully. It's a sword I always enjoy picking up. So this is one that really holds a special place in my heart. I chased for a long time the Sabre of Charlemagne from Hanway. It's out of production now, so that one's harder to find, but it represents a very early example of a single-handed sword in saber development, so I really appreciate that one. I like wakizashi, so and almost anytime I am able to pick up a wakizashi, as long as again it's not a particularly poor maker. I personally own an old Paul Chen practical wakizashi, a practical plus wakizashi that I really enjoy cutting with whenever I have the chance. And two examples from LK Chen. So one is the this Yuan saber that he just came out with, this Mongol Dao, and that is again from the very underrepresented Turco-Mongol saber group. So because this is such a not well seen saber type, I think that this is a very important saber to be made, and it handles very nicely. So this is a personal favorite saber of mine. The other one that I really appreciate is one that I have a very glowing review of, and that is the Tai Yang Yanling Dao. This is another one where every time I pick it up, I just really have a hard time putting it down. It's a personal favorite of mine. It just feels great in the hand. It's just very easy for me to use and take out and do cutting tests with. It just feels very natural. It's not super long. It's not super short. It's not super heavy. Its balance is good. Its ability to cut is good. Its ability to thrust is good. It's just an all-round, all-purpose good saber, and I really enjoy it. I really appreciate it. So it's a lot of fun. Okay. So that answered Zen Hydra. We got a couple other questions. From What If Brigade, have several different questions from What If Brigade. So What If Brigade asks, firstly, how did you learn to take apart, maintain, and put back together swords? Any recommendations? This is tricky because there are a tremendous number of swords, even within a given type. So let's look, for example, just within the 19th century. Within the 19th century, you have all sorts of different patterns of swords. So you have things like heavy cavalry palash. You have sabers, both of infantry designs. You have them for cavalry use. You have them for officers' weapons. You have dress swords, which are either going to be modeled after older small sword designs. You have things like spadroons. You have various other designs, much like you'd find in the American Civil War era militia swords that are kind of like cruciform style. It's Sinister Swordsman commenting here. I'll post. Let's see if I'm testing everything out here. So we're going to be experimenting with things. There goes your comment. We'll get to some of your questions shortly, Mr. Sinister Swordsman. So even within just the 19th century, for example, we have so many different types of sword. And within that constellation of different types of sword, let's just focus, for example, on just sabers, and even within that, maybe just German sabers. There can be different types of construction methods. So some will have nuts, others will be peened through the end, others will have bolts that go through the ears. So it really requires a lot of research and experience if you plan to take the sword apart and disassemble them, assuming that the sword is in good condition and fully assembled, and you need to disassemble it for some reason. So there's not a one-stop solution in order to be able to give yourself enough experience to be able to teach yourself how to properly disassemble a sword. Some of them are not meant to become disassembled and reassembled in the way that, for example, you find on Japanese swords. So if you're intending to be able to do sword disassembly, perhaps the easiest way to do that is by starting with Japanese swords. They're famously pretty easy to do that with. And that's not true for Japanese swords of all time periods and all designs. There are plenty of different construction methods for the hilts. But famously, a typical Ujikatana or Wakizashi Tanto is meant to have the blade be able to be taken apart, put in shirasaya, which is kind of like pajamas for the blade, just a plain white wood covering, and it's held together just by two Mikugi pins. So that's perhaps a good way to train yourself. Modern Ujikatana sometimes will have other things to assist the sword to stay in position. So instead of just simple wooden pins, they might use glue inside of the tang, inside of the nakago. So it can require a little bit more muscle power in order to get them out. But they are among the more easy swords to learn how to disassemble than something like even like a tulwar, which sometimes will have rivets through the handle and will be put together with cutler's resin, which will require you to usually have to heat the entire hilt assembly in order to loosen up the blade, and will require a lot of finesse in order to put it back into position. So that's a good question. Since Sinister Swordsman is here, why don't I move down and answer one of their questions? Sinister Swordsman's a good. He's got his own place. Go check out the work that Sinister Swordsman's doing as a another sword tuber friend. Okay, so first question: how did you get into swords? What was the first ever sword bought? First ever sword bought, I thought it was a wall hanger katana, but on reflection with Matthew Jensen, since Matthew Jensen had posed this question to me earlier, I realized that that was not the case. It was not a wall hanger katana, it was a wall hanger, different wall hanger sword. To be honest, that's not entirely true. If I go far enough back in history, it was probably something like this. Let me see if I can find one of these beautiful, beautiful swords for you, since I'm old enough that one of these would have been my first ever sword. So so something like this, if I blow this up, we're taking this whole outfit for a test drive, so you'll pardon me while I'm learning how SteamYard works. Oh, there we go. So one of these was probably my very first sword. One of these beautiful plastic numbers in the age of He-Man. Almost certainly I had one of these because I can distinctly remember that this kind of golden scabbard was cannibalized for one of my father's construction projects, and I was very upset by that at a pretty young age. After that, around maybe 1997, 1998, when the internet was young and eBay made you able to make very poor financial decisions with your disposable income, I can remember picking up a fantasy sword that had absolutely no name, had a stainless steel blade that I'm sure at one point got launched all the way across my backyard. So it was something that had dragons or bats or something in the hilt that was of no particular design, probably made in China or Pakistan. So that was the first sword I had. But very quickly thereafter, we were entering the end of the 90s. Anime was at all times high. I was practicing Japanese Koryu at the time. So I picked up a handful of katana of various questionable you know, manufacture. So those were my first sword. Before my first real proper sword was probably a windlass of some kind. I'm not sure. Either that or a Paul Chen, an old school Paul Chen blade of some kind. So yeah, and let's see what someone in chat has to say. So the Scholar General says that everyone had that sword growing up. And Sinister Swordsman says that it may have been a Kit Ray's thing. Yeah, it's possible. It was probably a knockoff Kit Ray rather than anything legitimate. I still have a, I can't go get it just because it's too big and it's in the other room, but I still have one of the United Cutlery Lord of the Rings licensed swords. I'll let everyone guess which one it was, since, of course, I have my favorites. Actually, I was one of the guys who, for my friends' birthdays, I would buy them swords. So for one of my best friend's birthday, I bought him one of the Lord of the Rings swords, since as the films came out, we would all dress up in costume for, for the premieres of each of them. So I think for the Two Towers, his birthday was around that time, and I wanted to buy him one of the United Cutlery swords. An overweight windlass saber. I wonder what model that was. I bet it was. I'm going to guess that that was one of the 1860 American cavalry sabers. And Scholar General guesses Anduril. No, I do like Anduril quite a bit, but I did not buy and did I ever buy it? I did not ever buy Anduril. I'm going to come back to that. We're going to answer another one of Sinister Swordsman's questions. All right, you commented on another one of my videos and you said, quote, "Beast cut on that bamboo. Do you grow it yourself?" Yes and no. Historically, I have grown other types of cane. I no longer live in South Florida. Once upon a time, I lived in the tropical part of Florida, and I would grow all sorts of things, including sugarcane that I intentionally planted, and bamboo and other items. Since moving to Pennsylvania, I had bamboo on the property when I moved in. The bamboo is not popular with the missus, and she has asked me repeatedly to get rid of it. I have culled it a few times. In fact, there's a video of me going up on the hillside and chopping it down using a variety of different swords and knives and machete and things like that. So it's owned by me, but I did not intentionally seed the property with bamboo. So I don't credit myself with growing it. I don't have a bamboo nursery, and I've slowly been cutting it down. I'm allowed like a very small area where I'm allowed to continue to cultivate bamboo, but it grows quite tall. Some of the stalks are 6 or 7 meters tall, and can be quite thick. So let's see what other guesses have gone on. So someone's guessing Sting. Scholar General says close. It was a windlass U.S. Revolutionary Sabre. I've seen that one a few times. I've wondered how it handles. And if your review is any indication, it's probably a little too chunky. So to put everyone out of their misery for guessing, the swords that I can remember buying were, for my friend, I bought Glamdring. he was way too short to play Gandalf, so he wasn't Gandalf. He just really liked Glamdring. He was a hobbit. Maybe I should have bought him Sting instead. And then for myself, I dressed as a ringwraith, and so I picked up the Witch King's sword, which I don't remember if it's named, but I really like that. I'll have to bring that on the channel sometime. I'll have to do a review. Maybe I can get Peter Lyon to have a comment on the design, because I really think that he was probably looking at some of the Scandinavian two-handers when he was designing that sword. Okay, so let me go back to a few more of my questions that I promised I would answer. What If Brigade asked also, what are your favorite short, choppy swords? That is kind of my wheelhouse. I do like choppy swords, but what do I qualify as short? So that's a good question. So for instance, if I go back here, pardon me while I make some noise. So this is LK's oxtail dowel, but this is quite choppy for sure. But this example is 76 centimeters in blade length, which I wouldn't consider particularly short. It's quite choppy, but I wouldn't consider it a particularly short blade. So I do like broad blades. I do like single-handed blades. I do like them that are choppy. But I usually consider things closer to wakizashi size to be short and choppy. I really like da. Da are in many cases quite light, but it depends on the depth of the blade and how they're constructed. So it'll vary from individual da to da. Some are very slab tipped. Others can be like the the ones across the border from Myanmar that are in Nagaland, in far eastern India, which are usually called dao instead of da. Here, let me pull up a picture of them. Kachin dao. So something like, yeah, something like this. They are pretty choppy and pretty cool. I think that they're pretty neat. I don't play with cookery too much. I have one cookery from Ex Gurkha House, which I rather like. I am of the belief that it's not particularly faithful to original cookery. I don't really specialize in them. I think that that particular example I have is pretty cool. I also don't have any really faithful gladi, so I'd like to spend more time on actual Roman period swords, since they're rather short. Because a lot of people think of them in terms of stabbing weapon, but I think that they would probably be very good at cleaving. They have a lot of cleaving power. So I'd really like to get an accurate gladius and really put it through its paces to see exactly how powerful they are from a cleaving perspective. Depending on the Dao, depending on the Chinese Dao, they even the Tai Yanling Dao is I guess it's a little on the shorter side, and it's quite choppy. So I rather enjoy that. I'm looking up at my wall. That Pai Dao that I showed the other day is quite choppy, and it's not particularly long. The Yatagan I have right next to it, the Zeybek Yatagan from the Ottoman Empire, also quite short and choppy, and I enjoy. I don't have a messer that I would consider a short sword. but I definitely enjoy Messer. So all of those I consider very fun short choppy swords. And as I pointed out before, I do like wakizashi. In some ways, I probably enjoy wakizashi more than I do uchikatana. Let's see what Sinister is saying. Hey, you have a Tinker Great Sword of War. Do you like? I'm thinking of buying one. Let's do a preview of our much longer video. So, this came in at the same time with the Albion Baron, and it's going to eventually be compared with it since they're both great swords of war. Now, when the Tinker Pierce Great Sword of War, oh, actually, here's Cult of Athena. Sword of War. When this was being advertised on Cult of Athena, Alientude was kind enough to point out that it was on sale for a very steep discount. So I jumped at the opportunity to pick it up. So thanks again, Alientude, for that. And if you see over here, let's blow this up. Some of these pictures. So these are the beauty shots that are here on KOA. And so I was expecting to get in maybe not exactly this. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a scratch and dent sale or something like that. Like, okay, if I'm getting it at such a huge discount, maybe there's a defect with it. Apparently, there's no defect. Apparently, it's coming in exactly, it's considered a standard model. However, take a close look at how this grip is here. Oh, let's go. Take a look at how the risers are formed and the type of grip material that we have. Oh, can I zoom in? There we go. All right. And then as soon as I opened it up out of the box, I tried to maintain my composure as I was filming it. But let's take a look, see if my camera can catch it. Do you notice any difference? Got a slightly different level of quality in the grip here. I feel like this was, oh, we have a Michael Tinker Pierce at home when I opened this up. So I'll tell all two of you people who are watching the stream that this will eventually be replaced. I'm planning to regrip this after I do the review. That said, the blade is of course pretty good. It's a nice blade. I've done a limited amount of cutting with it. It's a big, heavy sword, so it's not ever going to be confused with a long sword. If you plan to do, cutting against heavy targets, and that's always the concern that I have is whenever I have a sword, you really want to kind of have an adequate target to be able to test it against. If I have a small sword, I'm not going to be whacking my small sword against a tatami mat. And if I just have light water bottles, this is going to be moving slow enough that maybe it's not always going to have an easy time going through water bottles. So once the weather is better and I can start working on getting heavier targets out there, then I'll be able to have a much better sense at what it can actually do. But yeah, it's nice. I'll tell you right now, it's not really giving the Albion a run for its money. But yeah, it's if for the discount I got on, it's an easy buy. For what's it retailing for right now? It's retailing for $2.99. I could probably give it an endorsement for $2.99 if this type of sword interested you. I'd really prefer for it to have a different grip than the current grip that it has. That would be the biggest detractor that it currently has in the example that I have here. Keith, I don't know if you're on, but just so you see, this came in the other day. And so that's going to be getting measured and reviewed in the not too distant future. So that'll be fun. All right. Let's see where we're at. We're at 9:30. I'll try and keep it up for another 30 minutes. We'll try and make an hour out of it. All right. What other questions had Sinister Swordsman written? Oh, we had answered all of Sinister Swordsman's questions. Outside is Kurt. Inside, I hurt 699. That's the following. What are your personal guidelines on cutting with antiques? I don't see it here, but someone else had also asked a question, which will be, I think, a follow-up to this, saying, would you ever consider cutting with a Nihonto? So this is a little tricky because I have done cutting with antiques before, but this is my take on it. So with an antique sword, you really don't know the condition of the steel unless you can really track the entire history of the production of the sword up until the point that you have it in your hand, and that's almost impossible. So you really don't know what condition it's in, and so each time you stress it, you're always at the risk of it having some type of radical failure. And in most cases, that is just too high a risk to justify putting it through any paces. Now, not all swords are built the same. Not all swords have the same type of historical significance. And not all types of testing are the same. So it's still quite a bit of a formula. For example, there are in Japanese swords arts, it's not uncommon to see folks do testing, to see folks do simple going through their paces and going through their kata. And there's Mr. Alientude himself. Good to see you. We were just singing your praises for making good recommendations when sales go on Cult of Athena. You're the best. So again, if you're doing kata and Japanese sword arts, you might be using an ancestral blade. So you might be using an Edo period blade for that. I've seen folks in HEMA using sabers. So a saber, if you're practicing Roath or Waith or what have you. So that might not be unusual. But let's say someone wants to do Fiore, would they pick up and use a longsword that's an antique from the 15th century? That would probably rub everyone the wrong way. Yet, if you could authenticate and find an old uchi katana, that most people probably would not have an issue going through their paces with it, even with a very old uchi katana. Part of that is the approach that the Japanese have to conserving their blades and how they're treating them. Part of it is the availability of the swords. We really just don't have access to that many European swords, especially not from that period, and the condition they're in is not the same. So, to me, if I felt that there was some value in testing the blade, and I was confident that I wasn't going to damage the blade, and I felt that the sword was common enough that if there was some chance that the blade might get damaged, there wasn't a lot of risk involved. And it was my own blade. I'm not going to do this with anyone else's blade. I might engage in some cutting, but as a rule, generally no. As a rule, I normally would not encourage other people to do test cutting with antiques. if the sword is broken, is snapped in half already, is it rehilted, is it just a nude blade that someone's wrapped rope around? There's all sorts of mitigating factors that might encourage someone to do that. I do know of a friend who I mentioned previously has done some test cutting with a blade that they thought was very late period, maybe even as late as Showa era, or possibly Edo period, and may actually be as old as Kamakura era. So anything can happen. It's not to say that it's impossible that you couldn't cut with an older period blade, but uh, I wouldn't encourage anyone to cut with a particularly old blade. So let's see if anything's going on over here. What's up with everyone in chat? Alientude says he has a review of the Kingston Arms Type 13A coming up next month. Everyone make sure you check that out. That would be so awesome. Who did design that? I know Gus Trim has designed many of the Kingston Armed line. I'm not sure if he designed the Type 13A for sure. While you guys are deciding that, I'll read. I have one more question that I promised I'd answer. Then we'll have maybe a little bit close to 20 minutes before we wrap things up. Only fans when? Only Sabre fans when? Mr. Duzzies. All right. So, Super Robot Monkey Hype Team 3194 asks, wondering which of the Sabres is better in your opinion? The one Kilij you have or the LK Shamshir? The LK Shamshir grip seems a bit long. Forgive me for 1 second. I have to get the Shamshir. Okay. Now, the Shamshir has not been formally reviewed. So here is the Shamshir, and here is the Kilij. I'm going to put them right next to each other and watch what happens. The grip on the Shamshir is approximately, I'd say, 2 centimeters or so longer than that of the Kilij. Now, I have reasonably long hands. My hand is about an iPad large or so. I wear size large American gloves, for example. And when I hold the Kilij, my hand fits pretty much perfectly in there. And as a result, it's very secure when I'm manipulating it. I don't have to worry about it moving around. It locks in very tightly. And some of this will depend on how you are performing the movements of it. For instance, some Mamluk treatises suggest that you might even put a finger up here near the guard when you're engaging certain types of cut. You can slide the hand down into a handshake grip, just like in military saber. It's very comfortable because of how soft and how smooth the surfaces are. This is a horn grip, and it's got the big pistol in the back. But if you want to keep a hammer grip, even with my large hand, the size of it is perfect and locks it in place. You'd have to have a pretty significantly larger hand than mine in order to not be able to accommodate it in the Kilij. So I think that this particular example from Peserey is going to fit most people. The LK Shamshir, when I do this, when I do the same thing, can see how much is still exposed, and as a result, my hand will slide backward and forward along the grip. And in addition, it's consistent with other Persian examples. This is much thinner, and it doesn't have any swell towards the end, towards the pommel and the pommel cap. So my tendency, what I've noticed, is when I'm using it, if I go to throw out and deliver a cut, it wants to try and slide a little bit in my hand. So this is going to require a little bit of experimentation on my part, and admittedly, I don't know Persian swordsmanship. This is not a specialty of mine. I'll have to talk to some of my buddies. I know that Nonsec and a few of the others have just posted videos showcasing Tulwar versus Shamshir sword technique. So I might discuss it with them. But to me, this looks almost like a grip that you'd expect to have if you were planning to have a gauntlet or a glove or something else that required it to be a little bit wider for your hand to be able to fit within. I've talked about this with iPost Swords. He's going to do a more detailed video at some point. Perhaps his video will come out before my review. He's looking at historical examples, and while this does, I believe, fall within historic norms, this is definitely on the large side of grips. So, to me, I feel most comfortable using this with a thumb up the back, as in certain types of, again, European military saber fencing systems. Now, that's just talking about the grips. The blades are both really good. This one is sharper. This one has no secondary bevel at all. So it just goes flat, 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 and then all the way to the tip. However, the back is flat and not rounded, so there's less reinforcing on the back. In most examples, historical examples, a Shamshir will be rounded, so it'll have almost like a Japanese mune on the back of it. But the balance is good. The tooling on it is nice. It doesn't have any pitch to hold it in place, but again, it has the rivets through the handle, which are a historical way for mounting it to the hilt. If I could buy only one of the two, in this case, I'd probably choose the Peserey example, but both of them have pluses and minuses. Between the two, the LK Chen will probably cut better, but that's due to both the geometry of the blade and the final edge that's on it. In the hand, the Peserey handicraft is probably nicer. It feels more lively in the hand, and the hilt is nicer to hold. They're both very close. They're similar in price. They're both very good quality. They both have pluses and minuses. But between the two of them right now, I'm choosing the Peserey handicraft. If LK Chen made a couple modifications to the hilt, it would be even closer, and LK Chen might be able to edge it out. So close, but right now I'm giving it to the Ottoman saber. All right, what's going on? Let's chat over here. Alientude, I keep saying this, but your cutting is coming along nicely. That static through the cap on the 2-liter was sick. Let me echo what Sinister Swordsman is saying. Alientude has been coming along by leaps and bounds. He's going to be teaching all of us how to cut in the not-too-distant future. Yeah, the Shamshir is very pretty. There aren't too many available that like there. So windlass and cold steel both have. I think one is called a scimitar and the other is called a Shamshir, and both of them are not particularly historically accurate designs. One of them is more Ottoman in design, and the other one is just weird. Both of them have issues with their hilt components, where either they are hard to grip or they because they use wood instead of horn, they risk coming apart. So the LK Chen example is a really welcome um, addition to the market. Again, it's not perfect. It's just like any new model. So we'll see, especially because LK Chen continues to, whenever he comes out with a new sword, he continues to iterate on it. So the sword you buy today is going to be different than the version that he has 3 years from now. So I'm always interested to see what improvement he makes as the line continues to develop. Alientude says, should you grip the sword with the hook butted against your hand instead of your hand against the guard? I don't specialize in Persian fencing, so I don't know that. However, I have been surprised in more than one um, system. I've been surprised in seeing that in a lot of Sabre systems, the hand tends to go up closer to the guard rather than closer towards the pommel. Um, so, for example, in manuscript images from the Carolingian period, we see the hand against the pommel. So, like in a Viking style sword, if there's a gap, the hand gap is usually on the between the cross guard and the thumb, and then the pommel and the pinky finger are flush against one another. So that's where the hilt gap is. But if I'm looking at manuscript images from Eastern sources, so looking at um, stuff from produced by the Golden Horde or from um, Iran or stuff from further east, those those sabers will have long hilts, and almost always the hilts are sticking out significantly from the end, from the pinky end, and the hands seem kind of flush with the grips. Again, I mentioned at one point a manual actually recommends fingering the guard. So I suspect that if I get into it, the if I should probably be closer to the guard than the pommel, but I could be wrong. I'm prepared to be corrected on that. And Sinister Swordsman wants that KA-13A. Going to be a pretty sweet sword. I can only imagine. All right. And I think I answered all of the questions I had here. The historic Shamshir was based on a guy who had huge hands. It's possible. It's entirely possible. You always have to be careful for outliers, that's for sure. There's the opportunity for giant swords, and there's the opportunity for tiny swords. You have big people need swords too, and small people do as well. So you always are concerned for a grip, a hilt configuration like a Tulwar hilt, where it's very clearly designed for a hand of a specific size, and if it's too big or too little, it's very obvious. Same for Qatar, and you can find some that are obviously made for children or someone with incredibly small hands. It's less obvious if you have something like a longsword hilt or a katana hilt, then presumably you could use them regardless of how big or small you are. So that's always an interesting thing. Excellent. Well, this was a good first run. I'm glad to see that the software works so well. And I'm glad everyone was able to chat and chew the fat a little bit. We even were able to have Scholar General visiting from China. I didn't expect to see anyone on a Sunday night, but for us to get at least a handful of people in the stream, that's always a welcome experience. Hopefully, the recording will satisfy the promise that I made to answer viewer questions about sword related activities. So I'll give us a couple more minutes in case anyone else has any comments for the good of the group. Maybe I'll show one or two of my favorite swords while everyone is still on the stream. So Mr. Peter Decker recently posted this. It's not technically a sword, but I still like the look of it, so I'll post this one. I'll share this one. This is a helmet splitter. This looks like something out of a modern, like one of those sci-fi, techno-punk, cyberpunk RPGs. This looks like if you designed a sword for 2073, what it would look like. What a type of kabutawari. Peter always gets the most beautiful toys. Look at that. I don't know what's on there. Is that corn? Look at the flecking on that saya. Really pretty. Now I can't make out what animal that is. I'd have to go back and read. So we have that. Let's see what else I have. Oh, this isn't a sword either. I'm showing all these non-swords, but also very interesting that LK Chen just announced this pole arm. So this is a tiger fork, and I had a discussion with Scholar General about this, asking if this was an actual legitimate military weapon or if it was strictly a militia weapon. And it's older than I had originally thought, but this is definitely a weapon that was used in military context. We see them a lot in late periods of China, but it goes back much earlier than the Qing. They just happen to be used in the Qing quite a bit. Sifu Cuddle was commenting that he's very excited to have one of these because all of the examples that are produced currently are either floppy because they're again just for performance, or they're overly heavy and not balanced to be an actual fighting weapon. So they're often seen. Let's see if does KK have an example here. No. Oh, there's Seafood Cuddle himself. I'll be curious to know where he got the example he has for that demo, since they don't have the new one released yet. But they're often depicted being used either to hunt or defend against tigers, which I find interesting. So they're associated with tigers in Chinese mythology, or in Chinese art, I should say. So that's kind of cool. So that will be coming in the not too distant future from LK Chen. And then, since you didn't see it before, I'll show, and I guess I'll show you guys this example here, since we don't have too many people, so it won't spoil this. Can anyone guess what this is? Sinister, have you recognized one of these before? Got a cool little character here on the end, huh? So the end here is all brass, and it's been brazed to the rest of the steel. Let's take it out. Look at how long it is. This is super long. It just keeps going and 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 going. So this is a pretty big horseman sword, but they get even bigger than this. So coming soon to another antique video, the not too distant future. This is an Algerian flissa, and we'll be showing it off pretty soon. But I really like the scabbard that it comes with. It's got some really cool woodwork, and one of the neat things about it is how it accommodates the multiple dips in the blade, the belly of the blade, and it's actually split down the middle. So again, it's got the two halves to it, and it kind of bows out a little bit as it goes in, and because it needs to expand, it has these bands along it to prevent it from just splitting all the way open. So it's a really neat blade. All right, guys, we're coming right up on the hour mark, so I think that is a good place to pull it to an end. So I thank everyone for helping me test it out and for being so engaged. Really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun for me. Maybe I'll do it another time in the future. But it was a lot of fun. I hope everyone's having a good Sunday evening and looking forward to a fun week. We'll have lots more swords on a different night. All right, everyone. Until next time, take care.